I'm leaving the children to Dana. That was the first line of my mother's letter. She'd been dead for 4 days. And as I read it, I was sitting on a cold plastic chair in a police station, with 3 children waiting in the room on the other side of the wall, 3 children that nobody, not even the woman who'd just died, had ever asked me if I wanted to take. The officer lowered his voice. Gentle, like softness, could cushion what he was about to say. We need to know if you'll accept guardianship. I didn't answer him right away. I looked back down and kept reading. And then I saw the line that turned the blood in my body to ice. Dana doesn't have a family of her own. She has the time. She has the time. 33 years of my life, and my mother folded them into 5 words. No dreams, no career worth mentioning, no life of my own. Just the woman who always showed up whenever someone needed saving, and who was expected to show up now, even with her in the ground. But there was one thing my mother got wrong. One thing. I was too tired to keep saving the whole world. My name is Dana. And in that room, with a dead woman's letter shaking in my hands, for the first time in my life, I said no to my family. I'm 33, and I live alone in a small apartment in the Montevilla neighborhood of Portland, the kind with thin walls and a radiator that knocks like it's trying to get out. The night this started, I was standing at the edge of my parents' living room holding a paper plate of cake I didn't want, watching my younger brother soak up applause like sunlight. He'd just announced baby number 5. My father gripped his shoulder. My mother pressed a napkin to her eyes like another grandchild was proof from God that this family had done everything right. And I stood there in the corner, invisible until I was needed. I already knew what was coming. In my family, every celebration eventually turned into a job assignment with my name on it. Then my mother turned to me with a smile like she'd just solved a math problem. "You'll take the kids," she said. "Not would you. Not can we talk." A command, dressed up as a foregone conclusion. I set my plate down on the side table. I said, "No, I won't." The room went quiet so fast I could hear the ice settle in someone's glass. My brother's wife let out one short laugh and said the thing I'll never forget. "You don't have a family of your own. Think of it as practice." And something inside me that had been bending for 33 years finally stopped. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I picked up my purse, walked past every stunned face in that room, and left. I thought that was the end of it. I told myself they'd cool off by morning. I had no idea what they were already planning. Let me be honest with you for a second. If you've ever been the one in the room everybody looks straight through until there's work to be done, the dependable one, the single one, the one without kids who somehow owes everyone their weekends, then you already feel the temperature of that living room. I see you. This part of the story is for you. To understand why that note gutted me the way it did, you have to know this wasn't the first time my family treated my life like a storage unit they could open whenever they ran out of room. My brother is Marcus. His wife is Renata. My mother is Carol, and she's the kind of woman who can make manipulation sound like wisdom passed down through generations. My father is Glenn, and his specialty is staying silent until silence becomes a vote. Marcus and Renata already had 4 kids, 8-year-old Sienna, 6-year-old Theo, 4-year-old Posey, and the baby, Cole. I love those children. And that love was the exact lever my family pulled every single time. When Sienna ran a fever during the last week of a certification course I'd worked 2 years toward, I was the selfish one for not walking out of my exam. When Theo's daycare shut down for a week, Marcus showed up at my door and said, "You're the organized one anyway," and left him with me. When Posey was born, my mother told the whole extended family I had offered to help with the recovery, which somehow translated into 3 weekends of laundry, dishes, and bedtime routines, while Marcus golfed. Because, and I quote, "New dads need to recharge too. Every time I pushed back, they looked wounded. Every time I gave in, they called it love." So when Marcus held up that ultrasound photo like a trophy, my body understood before my brain did. That 5th baby wasn't only a baby. It was another link in a chain I never agreed to wear. My phone started buzzing before I even reached the main road. My mother, "Don't embarrass this family." Marcus, "You made Renata cry." Renata, "One day you'll be old and alone and you'll regret this." My father, "Just say sorry and let it go." I drove with the phone face down on the passenger seat and didn't answer a single one. The next morning I met my friend Wesley at a coffee shop on Belmont, because he was the only person in my life who never treated my no like an attack. I barely got my coat off before he said, "They did it again, didn't they?" I told him everything. The announcement. My mother volunteering me like I was furniture. Renata's practice comment. My father beaming at Marcus like producing a 5th child made him a war hero, while my actual adult life sat in the corner like a coat rack. Wesley listened to all of it. Then he set down his cup and said, "Dana, this isn't help anymore. This is ownership." I wanted to argue. I couldn't. And here's where I'll be honest with you again. Part of me still believed that if I just explained it clearly enough, calmly enough, with enough proof that I was a whole human being and not a backup plan, they would finally hear me. That belief is the most expensive thing I ever owned. Because that belief is what made me get in my car when my mother texted, "Come to the house. We need to fix your attitude before this becomes a real problem." Wesley told me not to go. He said people like that don't want a conversation. They want to surrender with good manners. But I went anyway. The moment I walked into my parents' kitchen, my mother was stirring iced tea like she was hosting a luncheon instead of an ambush. Marcus sat at the table scrolling his phone. Renata leaned against the counter with eyes that were red in a way that looked rehearsed, like she'd figured out how to cry without smudging anything. My father stood by the sliding door. Silent, as always. "Dana," my mother said, "we're not asking for much." "You didn't ask at all," I said. Marcus glanced up. "Don't be dramatic. Nobody said forever." Renata folded her arms over a stomach that wasn't even showing yet. "Just through the pregnancy. Maybe the first year. You know how hard newborns are." "That's not a small favor," I said. "That's a childhood." My mother sighed the sigh she'd been aiming at me my whole life. "You work from home half the week. You rent a one-bedroom. You don't have a husband. You don't have kids. What exactly are you protecting so fiercely?" That sentence landed harder than any scream could have, because it was the cleanest version of what they all believed. My life didn't look like theirs, so it didn't count. "I'm protecting myself," I said. Marcus actually laughed. "From your own family?" "From people," I thought, "who only call it family when there's a bill to hand me." I didn't say it. I almost did. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost let it go. Something stopped me. "Hello?" A man's voice, even and careful. "Is this Dana Whitlock? This is Officer Reyes with the Bridgeton Community Center. Are you aware that 3 children were dropped off here this morning, listed under your name?" I looked across the kitchen at Marcus, and his face changed before a single word left my mouth, just a tightening at the corners. But it was enough. "What children?" I said, though I already knew. The officer continued. "There's a handwritten note stating you agreed to supervise 3 minors today, Sienna, Theo, and Posey, and that the parents would be unreachable. Staff flagged it because no approved adult ever completed check-in." My mother reached for the edge of the counter. Renata looked at the floor. Marcus said, "It's not a big deal." And that was the exact second I understood the whole design. They hadn't merely assumed I'd obey. They had built a situation where refusing would make me the monster. They had turned my no into the crime. I need to pause here, because I still can't fully describe what that does to a person. To find out the people who share your blood sat down, found a pen, and wrote a lie about you, then handed it to strangers and walked away. If you've ever had someone take a story about you completely out of your hands and make it real with an official stamp, you know that specific kind of cold. It doesn't feel like anger first. It feels like falling. I left that kitchen without another word, because if I'd stayed one more minute I'd have said something that made the story about my rage instead of their choices. Marcus followed me onto the porch, dropping his voice like he was offering me a gift. "Don't make this official." I turned around. "You made it official the second you handed my name to a police officer." He rolled his eyes. "They're your niece and nephews." "Then why?" I said. "Did you leave them with a note instead of a phone call?" He had no answer. That silence rode shotgun with me all the way to the center, and the whole drive, my mind kept dragging me backward. Every Saturday I lost because Marcus needed one break. Every vacation day I burned because Renata decided daycare germs gave her anxiety. My mother telling our relatives Dana is just wonderful with the kids, and conveniently never mentioning the times I'd sat in my parked car afterward and cried from sheer exhaustion, completely unseen. I kept all of those years quiet. I was about to stop. At the center, the woman at the front desk knew my name before I said it. "They're in the activity room," she said gently. "Officer Reyes is with them." I walked down a hallway covered in bright paper stars and painted handprints, and somehow the cheerfulness of the place made it all uglier. Sienna sat at a low table with her arms wrapped around herself. Theo stared at a puzzle without touching a single piece. Posey clutched a stuffed bear that clearly wasn't hers. The baby, Cole, wasn't there. Renata had decided he was too little for the plan. The moment Sienna saw me, her whole face folded with relief. "Aunt Dana," she whispered. I knelt next to her, but I didn't promise her everything would be fine. Kids deserve the truth softened, not lies wrapped in comfort. "I'm here," I told her, "and the grown-ups are going to sort this out." Theo looked up at the officer and asked, in the smallest voice, "Are we in trouble?" That nearly took my knees out. No, I said immediately. You are not in trouble. None of this is your fault. Officer Reyes handed me a clear sleeve with the note inside. Do you recognize this handwriting? I knew before I read a word. The note said, Dana Whitlock has agreed to care for Sienna, Theo, and Posey until further notice. She is their aunt and has no other obligations. Their parents are preparing for a new baby and need family support. Please contact Dana with any concerns. I read has no other obligations 3 separate times. It didn't read like a note. It read like a confession. My mother had taken my entire worth and written it down in $2 ink and handed it to people who'd never met me. Did you agree to this? Verbally or in writing? The officer asked. No. Have you been a caregiver for them before? I took a slow breath. I've babysat sometimes under pressure. I couldn't refuse. But I have never agreed to ongoing care, pick-up authority, or custody for any length of time. He wrote that down. Do you have anything showing you refused? Yes. I pulled up the texts from the night before. My no, I won't. My mother's don't embarrass this family. Marcus's you'll do it anyway. Renata's, you owe us. We gave your life meaning. Something shifted in the officer's expression at that last one. He explained, carefully, that the center could not just transfer the kids to me because a relative dropped off a note. Staff had called the police because the children were left near the side door before anyone completed registration, and the adult who left them never came inside to fill out a form. That detail flattened me. My family hadn't even had the nerve to walk through the front door and say their lie to someone's face. They'd left it at the side entrance, like a package. What happens now? I asked. We contact the parents, he said. If they can't retrieve the children promptly, child services may be notified. You are not required to accept responsibility. In fact, if you don't consent, you should not take them home just to smooth things over. I looked at the 3 of them. My family had bet everything on one thing, that my love for these kids would always be stronger than my instinct to survive. Sienna tugged my sleeve. Mom said you wanted us. I closed my eyes for 1 second. I always want you safe, I told her. But grown-ups are not allowed to lie about who's responsible for you. Then I did something that surprised even me. I took photos. The note, the text messages, the visitor log showing the time the kids were found. I didn't want the loud, screaming kind of revenge. I wanted the kind that's impossible to argue with later. I wanted the truth so well documented it could never be bent again. And I'll be honest, somewhere in that plastic chair, fear turned into something steadier. Not rage. Clarity. Marcus arrived first, angry, because anger is so much easier to wear than shame. Renata came in behind him with one hand resting on her stomach like a shield before anyone had raised a hand. My mother came last, dressed for church on a Tuesday, because she liked to look respectable while doing something ugly. My father stayed out in the parking lot close enough to claim he was involved, far enough to avoid any of it. Officer Reyes asked everyone into a small side room. I was included, because my name was on the note. Now, I want to slow this down, because this is the part I've replayed 1,000 times. This is where time stretched out like taffy. Marcus opened with, "This is just a family misunderstanding." The officer looked at the note in its sleeve and said, "A misunderstanding doesn't usually involve leaving children at a facility without check-in." Renata's jaw tightened. They weren't abandoned. Dana was supposed to come. I never agreed to come, I said. My mother turned to me with the disappointed face she'd weaponized for 3 decades. Dana, this is not the time to be stubborn. And I sat there, and I genuinely could not believe it. 3 children had been left with strangers. The police were in the room, and somehow my boundary was still the emergency. The officer asked, "Who wrote the note?" Nobody spoke. The silence got heavy. Then he looked directly at my mother, Mrs. Whitlock. She lifted her chin the way she always did. "I wrote it. Dana has always helped. The children feel safe with her." "That's not what I asked," he said, and his voice never changed. "Did she agree to be responsible for them today?" My mother's mouth opened, then closed. Marcus jumped in. She was being difficult, but we knew she'd come around. "So she refused," the officer said. "It wasn't even a question now. She was emotional," Renata said. "That's not a yes," I said. Marcus turned on me, his face going red. "You're really going to do this in front of a cop?" "No," I said. And I kept my voice so quiet they had to lean in. "You did this when you left your children at a community center with my name on a piece of paper." The room went completely still. For the first time, out loud, the sentence sounded exactly as bad as it was. I watched it land on every face. My mother reached for the gentler weapon. "Dana, sweetheart. Nobody meant any harm. You're just so wonderful with them. Marcus and Renata are under so much pressure." A fifth baby is a blessing, but it's a lot. Then they should have planned for a lot, I said, before they announced it like a parade. Renata gasped. Marcus stood halfway up. Sir, the officer said evenly, please stay seated. Marcus sat, but the color climbed his neck. You've always been jealous, he spat. You can't stand that I built a family and you didn't. And there it was again. The emptiness they kept assigning me so they'd have somewhere to dump the work. Here's where I have to be honest with you one more time, because if it had been me even a year earlier, I think I would have crumbled right there. Jealous, it's such a small, sharp word, and they'd been sliding it under my door my whole life. But I didn't crumble. I looked at my brother and I said, very calmly, no, Marcus. I can't stand that you keep having children and then treating every other adult as unpaid staff. Renata's eyes filled. How can you say that? I'm pregnant. Being pregnant, I said, doesn't make lying okay. My mother lightly slapped her palm on the table. Enough. You will apologize to your brother and his wife, and I turned to the officer instead. I'd like it documented that I am not an emergency contact, a guardian, a caregiver, or a child care provider for these children, unless I personally agree, in writing, for a specific date and time. He nodded and wrote it down. Marcus laughed, bitter and low. You're making yourself look heartless. I took out my phone. No, I said, I'm making myself clear. And I read the messages out loud, one by one. You'll do it anyway. You owe us. We gave your life meaning. Don't embarrass this family. Come fix your attitude. Renata tried to cut in. The officer asked her to wait. And I watched my mother's face change with each sentence. She had expected me flustered, apologetic, cornered by guilt, the way I always had been. She had not, in her entire life, expected evidence. That was the first real taste of power I'd ever had. Not revenge as destruction. Revenge as a paper trail. I want to stop and say something about my mother now, because I don't think she's a monster, and I think the story is stronger if I tell you the truth about her. My mother grew up the oldest of 7, in a house where her own childhood got eaten alive by everyone else's needs. To her, a family is one shared pool of resources, and the person without a husband or kids is simply the one with the most left to give. She wasn't being cruel in her mind. She was applying the only law she'd ever lived under. She had given up her whole self for other people, and she could not understand why I wouldn't. That doesn't make it okay. But it's the difference between a villain and a person, and I needed you to see her as a person, because that's what made the next year so hard. Officer Reyes explained that the children had to be picked up by their parents, and that the incident would be on record. He added that a referral could be made if there were repeated attempts to leave the kids without confirmed care. Marcus's confidence finally cracked. A referral? Are you serious? When children are left without supervision? The officer said. Yes. Renata started crying for real, then not the rehearsed kind, but the kind that comes when consequences walk into the room for the first time. My mother leaned toward me and whispered, Dana, look at what you're doing to this family. A year earlier, that sentence would have ended me. But sitting there with her handwriting sealed in plastic and her lies on the record, I finally saw the trick I'd been falling for my whole life. They cause the harm. Then they hand you the shame. I didn't do this, I said. I refused to hide it. When the meeting ended, Marcus and Renata had to sign the children out with their own hands. I hugged Sienna, Theo, and Posey goodbye, and I made sure each of them knew I wasn't angry at them. Sienna whispered, Are you still our aunt? I kissed the top of her head. Always. But adults have to tell the truth now. Outside, my father finally walked over to me in the parking lot, and for one stupid, hopeful second, I thought he was going to say he was sorry. Instead, he said, You took this too far. I looked at him. No, Dad, I said. I finally stopped carrying it quietly, and I drove away while my phone began to detonate. By the time I got home, there were 19 missed calls and one voicemail from my mother that opened with, I hope you're proud of yourself. That told me everything I needed to know. I didn't call back. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and wrote the most important thing I've ever written. I kept it cold on purpose, because emotion was the thing they knew how to twist. Facts are harder to bend. I wrote that I, Dana Whitlock, do not consent to be listed, named, implied, or treated as a caregiver, guardian, emergency contact, driver, or childcare provider for Marcus and Renata's children, without my prior written agreement for a specific date and time. I added that any future attempt to leave a child in my care without my consent would be reported. I attached the screenshots, the photo of the note, and my refusal text. I emailed it to all of them, and blind copied myself. Then I saved it in a folder I named, simply, Boundaries. It felt cold, It also felt like the first full breath I'd taken in years. If you've made it this far with me, I want you to do something. Comment 1 if you think I went too far. Comment 2 if you think I did exactly what I should have. Comment 3 if you've lived a version of this yourself and you're still untangling it. And tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is there. I'm always amazed how far these stories travel, and I read more of your comments than you'd think. I called Wesley. He picked up on the first ring. Tell me you didn't take the kids home. I didn't. He exhaled like he'd been holding it. Good. I'm proud of you. And that landed in me without a single hook attached, which I realized in that moment I'd almost never felt from family. We made a plan over dinner. Written communication only. No visits to my parents without a witness or a clear reason. A note to the center confirming I'd never consented. And if Marcus tried to smear me, I'd answer once, with facts, and never again. You don't beat a manipulation machine by feeding it more emotion, Wesley said. You unplug it. I wanted to believe it was over. It wasn't. 2 days later, my cousin Priya sent me a screenshot from a family group chat I'd muted months ago. Marcus had written that I abandoned his kids at a center because I was bitter about the new baby. Renata added that some women just can't stand watching other people build families. My mother replied with a folded hands emoji and the word heartbroken. Then the relatives piled on. An aunt called it shameful. An uncle said my late grandparents would be devastated. Someone I barely knew wrote that this is exactly why people without children don't understand sacrifice. I felt the old heat rise. But this time it wasn't guilt. It was precision. I texted Priya. Are they telling people I agreed to watch them? She wrote back. Yes. He says you backed out last minute. So I did exactly what Wesley said. One message. For the record, I never agreed to watch the children. They were left at a community center with a note falsely claiming I'd accepted responsibility. The responding officer documented that I did not consent. I won't discuss the kids publicly, but I will correct lies about my involvement. And I attached one image the note, with the children's names blurred. But my mother's sentence perfectly visible. Dana has no other obligations. Then, silence. For 11 beautiful minutes, nobody typed. Then Priya messaged me privately. Oh my God. Aunt Diane just deleted her comment. Uncle Ross left the chat. My mother called. I let it ring. Marcus texted. Take that down. I replied. Stop lying, he wrote. You're humiliating Mom. I replied. Mom wrote it. That was the second taste of power. The first was documentation. The second was refusing to protect people from the truth of their own handwriting. And the story didn't go the way they planned. Renata's sister knew someone connected to the center, and word got out that an incident report existed. Suddenly the question in the family wasn't, why is Dana so heartless? It was, why were those kids left without a proper check-in? Their church friends started asking gentle, pointed questions. A neighbor mentioned seeing my mother's car by the side entrance that morning. Marcus went from threatening me to begging me to stop escalating. I told him the same thing every time. I'm not escalating. I'm keeping records. This is the part where I want to tell you what this whole thing taught me, because I think it's the only reason worth telling the story at all. What I understood that nobody else in that room did was this. Love for a child is real, and it is also the easiest thing in the world for someone to use as a crowbar. The mistake most people make, the mistake I made for 33 years, is believing that if you just feel guilty enough, the guilt must be a debt you owe. It isn't. Guilt is a feeling. A debt is something you agreed to, and nobody ever agreed on your behalf. If you take one concrete thing from this, take this. The next time someone hands you a responsibility you never accepted, put your refusal in writing, calmly, and keep a copy. Not because you're cold, because a written no is the one thing a manipulation machine can't reword. And here's the question I want you to sit with after this ends. How many times have you called something love when it was really just guilt wearing your family's last name? The official meeting came the following week, and this time I didn't go alone. Wesley came with me not to speak, just to sit beside me as living proof that I had someone in my corner who didn't profit from my silence. There was the officer, a center director, and a child services intake worker. Marcus and Renata came late. My mother arrived carrying a folder like an attorney, though it turned out to hold nothing but printed photos of me smiling next to the kids at birthdays, as if a happy picture was a signed contract. My father came too, and sat in the back, and looked smaller than I remembered him being. The director explained the meeting was about establishing safety procedures and clarifying responsibility. Marcus pounced. Exactly. Dana's making this sound criminal. It was a misunderstanding. The intake worker asked, plainly, who physically left the children at the center? Nobody answered. The director checked her notes. A staff member observed Mrs. Carol Whitlock leaving the side entrance at approximately 8:14 a.m. My mother stiffened. I walked them in. You didn't complete intake, the director said, and you left before staff confirmed an approved adult. And then Renata, quietly. Carol, you told us it was handled. My mother shot her a look, and for the first time I saw a crack open between them. Manipulators only work when everyone agrees to the same lie. Under questions, their stories came apart at the seams. Marcus said Renata was overwhelmed and Mom offered to help. Renata said Marcus told her I'd agreed after I cooled off. My mother said she just knew I'd do the right thing because I always had. And my father, my quiet, careful father, admitted he'd heard me say no at the gathering but figured I'd come around once the children were involved. The intake worker wrote it all down. Their own words built the case far better than mine ever could. Then my mother slid her folder of photographs across the table. Look, she loves them. She's always been involved. The worker glanced at the pictures politely and said the sentence I wanted carved into stone. Loving a child does not create legal responsibility without consent. She explained what came next. Marcus and Renata would have to submit an updated childcare plan, approved emergency contacts, and written confirmation from every person listed. The center suspended their drop-off privileges until it was complete. The report would stay on file. Another attempt to leave the kids without confirmed care could open a neglect inquiry. Marcus stared at me like I'd personally invented consequences. Are you happy? He asked. And I answered him honestly. No, I'm relieved. The director turned to me. Miss Whitlock, would you like your name removed from all center records except as a relative with no pickup authority? Yes, I said, without a half-second of hesitation. Renata looked panicked. But what if there's an emergency? I looked right at her. Then you call someone who agreed to be your emergency contact. We don't have anyone else, she said. And there it was, the whole truth in 5 words. They had no plan, because for years their plan had been me. My mother tried one final time. Dana, please, don't tear this family apart over paperwork. And I turned to her and said the truest thing I had ever said to her. Paperwork is the only reason you can't lie about me anymore. The meeting ended with signatures. Marcus and Renata signed that they understood I was not a caregiver. My mother signed a statement acknowledging she had no authority to assign childcare to me. My father signed as a witness, because he'd heard my refusal, and watching his hand shake over that pen didn't make me happy. It made me grieve for the girl who'd waited her whole childhood for him to protect her, only to finally understand he'd always just protected the easier thing. The fallout came in slow waves over the following months, and each wave took something from the version of my family that ran entirely on appearances. The center held Marcus and Renata to a real plan with real signatures and real late fees. Renata's mother found out the whole story and called her, not me, asking how her grandchildren ended up at a center under a false arrangement. My mother's reputation took a hit. She never saw coming for years. She'd been the wise grandmother. Everyone called for advice on keeping family together. And then 5 words in her own handwriting traveled farther than any sermon. Relatives started comparing notes, and realized she'd done smaller versions of this to other people for decades. Assigning work, rewriting consent, using guilt as a calendar. And Marcus and Renata finally had to live inside the life they kept trying to outsource. They paid for actual help, and the cost stunned them, and Marcus canceled a golf weekend. And somewhere in there they learned that free labor doesn't disappear, it just resigns. 6 months later, after the baby came, Marcus sent me a single photo with no caption. A little boy. Healthy. Perfect. Completely innocent of all of it. I looked at that picture for a long time, feeling love and grief share the same breath. Then I wrote back, he's beautiful. Congratulations. Marcus replied, do you want to meet him? And I knew exactly what that question used to mean. It used to mean, are you ready to be useful again? So I answered carefully, I'd love to meet him as his aunt. I'm not available for childcare. He didn't reply for 2 days. Then, finally. Fine. That word wasn't an apology, but it was a border, and a border was more than I'd had in 33 years. I visited on a Sunday, with Wesley waiting at a bookstore down the block, because I still didn't fully trust the room. The house was chaos, laundry on the couch, Sienna helping Posey with a shoe, the TV too loud. My mother was there, holding the baby, and she didn't hand him to me with a list of instructions. She looked at me, a little stiffly, and asked, would you like to hold him? Asked. That word mattered more than any apology could have. I said yes. He was warm and impossibly small against my chest, and for a moment the whole room went quiet. Then Sienna climbed up beside me and whispered, Mom says grown-ups have to ask now. My eyes burned, but I smiled. That's a good rule, I told her. Later, in the kitchen, Renata surprised me. I'm sorry, she said, for the practice thing. At the announcement. I studied her face, looking for the angle, the hidden invoice. I didn't find one. Thank you, I said. That one hurt. She nodded. I know. Marcus never apologized. My father never apologized. My mother came the closest she ever would when she said, once, I suppose I assumed too much. It was the smallest possible admission, but it proved the past could not simply repeat itself. Because that's the part people don't understand about revenge. The most satisfying version isn't always watching someone fall apart. Sometimes it's watching someone who used to command you finally learn how to ask. I didn't turn cold. I turned clear. I still love those kids. I send birthday gifts. I show up to school plays when I'm invited. I visit when I choose to, I leave when I need to, and I never again pick up a responsibility just because someone set it down at my feet. Even the group chat changed. People started using actual words. Are you available? Would you be willing? It was almost funny how revolutionary basic consent sounded in a family that had preached love for decades without ever once practicing it. A year after all of it, I moved into a small condo I bought with my own name on the deed. Nothing fancy. Mine. The first night, I sat on the floor with takeout noodles, surrounded by half-open boxes, and I opened that folder labeled Boundaries. I thought I'd feel bitter. Instead, I felt grateful to the version of me who'd been terrified in a plastic chair and chose the truth anyway. The one who looked at 3 frightened kids and refused to let love be used as a weapon against her. I didn't delete the folder. I archived it. Some lessons you keep where you can find them. Then I turned off my phone and slept better than I had in years. So if you're listening to this and you're the dependable one, the single one, the childless one, the quiet one, the one they only praise when you're useful, I need you to hear me clearly. Your life is not spare time for other people's emergencies. Your love is not consent. Your guilt is not a contract. And real family does not need to trap you in order to keep you close. I really do want to know what you think, so before you go, comment 1 if you think I went too far, 2 if you'd have done the same, 3 if you've lived your own version of this. Tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is there. And if your own family ever tried to turn your boundaries into abandonment, tell me, because I used to think walking away would burn everything down. It didn't. It only burned down the version of my family that needed me to disappear. If this reached something in you, do me a small favor and subscribe. I tell these stories because I think the quiet, dependable ones deserve to hear that they're no matters, and I'd love for you to stick around for the next one. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Portland to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.